From the Skyterra Wellness Retreat, this is the Inspired Intentions Podcast, where we help people build the skills and mindset to live a healthy life. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's episode, if you've been enjoying our podcast, take a moment to rate and review. It may seem like a small thing, but our ratings and reviews make a huge difference in the quality of our show. They help us reach more listeners like you so we can continue bringing you more amazing content. So, if you've found inspiration, learned something new, or just love tuning in every week, please rate the Inspired Intentions Podcast 5 stars and leave us a review and even share with a friend. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Now let's get into the show.
Hello, Inspired Intentions listeners. Welcome back to the third in our series on how to live forever, because we want nothing more than for you to have a long, healthy, and fulfilling life. And as I've mentioned before, with the release of our new website, we took the opportunity to really refine our pillars and the pillars of our program. And so we're taking the time on podcast to go through each of those. The third pillar that we're going to talk about today is mindfulness. And the way that we used to describe this, we used to actually link yoga and mindfulness together. But what we did was we moved yoga into our movement pillar, and we wanted to really highlight how important mindfulness is just across all of our pillars. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And to do that, I am so honored to introduce our guest, Claire.
Thank you, Rachel. The honor is mine.
And Claire, do you mind reintroducing yourself to our listeners?
I'd be happy to. My name's Claire. I'm our program director here at Skyterra, which has been the greatest gift thus far. And I get to work a lot with our guests in teaching them various classes. They include subjects like mindfulness and also just get to interact a lot with our guests and work with some amazing people on our team. And it's just truly a joy.
Thank you so much, Claire. And listeners, Claire has been on before. Episode 194 is the episode that we used to introduce her to the Skyterra world, and that was when she spoke about breath work. A very powerful episode. And then episode number 205, which actually has been blowing up on YouTube, is Pilates 101. So if you want more of Claire's work, please go back and listen. And then just a reminder, this is the third episode in a series of 5 that we're releasing on how to live forever. If you haven't already, go back and listen to our movement focus, our nutrition focus, and then coming up in the next couple of weeks, we will focus on play and we will focus on rest, which are obviously very important to our pillars as well. But Claire, I'm really excited to talk about this with you today. I always learn so much from you personally and a little bit selfishly when we talk. In fact, when we were planning out this episode, you said something to me that I have not been able to stop thinking about in the past week. And it was so powerful to me that I have shared it with a few other people in my life, including some of our coworkers here at Skyterra. And so I'm excited to talk about that. And I'm excited, listeners, for you to hear everything that she has to share. But just getting into it, Claire, when we talk about mindfulness, what does it mean to you and why is it so important?
Well, first of all, thank you for your beautiful words. That's especially meaningful coming from someone like you, who I feel like just gracefully embodies so much of what we're going to be talking about already. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Claire.
I like to think of mindfulness more as a way of life, honestly. I think that a lot of times we go into a mindfulness practice or journey focused on the practices themselves. And then over time, there's naturally an evolution that starts to occur where it just kind of becomes our way of life and how we see the world and how we interact with the world around us. And to me, that's just being overall intentional, being connected to ourselves and what our values are, but also just who we are as human beings and what aligns for us and what feels authentic to us, but also just awaken to the fullness of life and all of the beauty that surrounds us. I think that sense really incorporating mindfulness into my life, I've had some of the most powerful just epiphany moments in nature and moments of awe and wonder that have brought me to tears and given me so many smiles and things like that. And just allows us to also have more vulnerability in our experiences because of how it can open our minds and open our hearts and give us new perspectives and give us just a greater feeling of love for ourselves and for others and for life. So, if I had to summarize, I would say it's a way of life that can just make us more intentional and connected. But it can also be an umbrella term for some of the practices that mindfulness represents, such as meditation, breath work, self care, mindful eating, anything along those lines.
What I love too about what we do at Skyterra is mindfulness can encompass everything that you've described, of course, and it also means different things for different people. We use mindfulness too to cover this concept of self-care, being really intentional about the way that you take care of yourself. Of course, for our guests seeking some therapy while they're here at Skyterra, we offer that as well. And of course, we have our Skyterra Spa, where if you're looking for self-care in that way, which so many of us are, it's certainly a beautiful place to get that taken care of as well. Um, but when it comes to this issue of self-care and why it's so important as a pillar of our program here at Skyterra, what is it about mindfulness? What is it about self-care that is essential for improving health and extending longevity?
I know that for me and from many of our guests, in terms of what they've shared with me so beautifully, I think that self care can sometimes come even with a subconscious resistance or some intimidation because a lot of us feel the pressure of time or might feel that it's selfish to take care of ourselves when it can sometimes feel like we have a lot of other people that we need to take care of or a lot of responsibilities that we're trying to manage gracefully. But in reality, I think that we need self care in order to continue to do those things with grace and with intentionality and without burning out. And I think mindfulness can be that bridge for us where it can connect us back to ourselves, but also then lead us into those healthy interactions with others and the ability to more fully show up for others around us. So I think that self care can be both just a very nice way to learn how to relax again, because that's something that sounds so simple, but I think over time can be something that's really difficult for a lot of people to
Mm-hmm.
just relax and let go, but can also really enhance our interactions and deepen our relationships.
With the guests who come here at Skyterra, I know we hear so often that guests are so used to just giving, giving, giving to everybody in their lives. They're
Hmm.
caregivers, sometimes on both ends. So they're taking care of children, they may be taking care of aging parents. They give in their careers, and it is so easy to not do what you said. It's so easy to
Right.
push aside self-care, to resist it. Just in what you've seen, not only with our guests, but maybe even in your own life, what happens when you're not taking care of yourself?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it can lead us to just operating in more of an autopilot mode or survival mode, which is, for one, not very fulfilling to live in that state, but also will ultimately lead to things like resentment and frustration towards ourselves and towards the people that we're actually trying to dedicate our time and our energy to. And I think that it can also just create a lot of health conditions, even like chronic pain because of what we're storing in our bodies
Mm.
or from not getting adequate rest and not adequately releasing our minds from internally carrying and processing all of those things at all times. And I think it can also end up hindering those relationships sometimes that we're actually trying to center our lives around because of the burnout and the impatience that it can sometimes lead to, and then the reactivity and things like that, and just fatigue. So I think it can create ultimately a lot of chaos, both internally and then
Mm.
unfortunately outwardly as well, and can sometimes lead people to that breaking point moment, which never feels good when you're in it, but
Yeah.
can sometimes lead to something really beautiful, which is what we get to witness a lot of times here. People kind of feel like they're at their breaking point before they come to Skyterra, oftentimes, but it gives them that push and that inspiration to come to a place like this for a respite. And I think oftentimes the transformation is just so incredible and miraculous to get to be a part of and to get to witness unfold while they're here.
Yeah. What are some small just things that you can do every day in terms of taking care of yourself, in terms of being mindful that would create longer term benefits, both physically and mentally?
Well, I love this question because I think that one of the roadblocks for mindfulness is it can sometimes come with a sense of pressure and intimidation because we think of some of the bigger practices or tools that do require more time or energy or even resources. Like even just doing a 20-minute meditation in the morning sometimes for people feels
Yeah.
inaccessible and intimidating. And then it can come with a lot of guilt when they're not able to carry that goal out if they were to set it. So I love the thought of just small daily acts that can center us back to ourselves and then lead us to all of those benefits of mindfulness, like enhancing our lives and our connections. And some of those that come to mind for me are even just closing our eyes for a moment once we arrive wherever we're trying to go, whether it's work or a family outing, and just taking a moment to just kind of really feel into that moment and what it is that we're stepping into. Or sometimes for me in really busy seasons, my meditations have to actually be driving to work, but being really present and
Mm-hmm.
actually really taking in that experience of driving to work. I oftentimes will think about what I'm grateful for in regards to work and the connections there with our guests and our amazing team. And also just even taking in the surroundings that I drive past every single day. But when I'm not in a mindful, meditative state, sometimes either grow numb to or just miss completely. And so I love those moments on the way to work when I'm just in a more mindful headspace where I get to really see and absorb the sunset, for example, or sunrise on the way to work, and moments of just catching the fog as it's rising and things like that. And those are things that I know that years ago, prior to incorporating mindfulness, I definitely wouldn't have been able to probably witness at all, but definitely not appreciate with depth and really, really experience the beauty of all of those little things that are available to us every day that can feel like big things when we're really experiencing them. I think also things like just reading a book for fun can be really positive. A lot of times, I know for me personally, if I'm going to read or going to be doing something in regards to learning, I feel like it has to be about learning or has to be about self growth or something spiritual or something along those lines. And it can actually feel just so joyful and liberating, even to read a fiction book or a fantasy book, something that can also connect us back to our imagination and other gifts that we hold that can then pair really well with mindful practices as well. Because if we're reading fantasy books and then doing a visualization meditation, for example, it's going to make all of that more alive for us in our minds and our hearts as well. And then just little things like legs up the wall, like doing legs up the wall, which is a yoga posture where your back is either on the ground or on a mattress if you're in bed, and then putting your legs up the wall so you're creating a 90-degree angle. It's very soothing to our nervous system, also can help to lower inflammation in the body. And you could even just do it for one song that grounds you or one sound healing song on Spotify, or do it with some breath work. And that can be very transformative in terms of how we release our day from the active part of the day into the evening and shift into something more restorative. So all of those come to mind most easily for me because they're some of the ones that I practice the most personally. But I think there are so many little examples of things that can just connect us more back to ourselves and can enhance our lives and enhance our sense of presence. And to me, that's what mindfulness is: coming back to ourselves, enhancing our lives and our connection to the world around us, and coming back to that place of being truly rooted in the present moment.
I love that image. First of all, I love how all of these don't take very long because I think it can be really easy to
Mm-hmm.
feel like, yes, I would love to meditate and I don't have one extra hour or one
Right.
extra half hour. And so I love how accessible these are. But what I really appreciate about what you just said was this image of taking just a second after you turn off your car, wherever you're at,
Mm-hmm.
to just be grateful and breathe into it, because I had this image of myself kind of like coming in hot into a
Mm-hmm.
driveway and like putting the car in park and pulling the
Yeah.
keys out and running out the door. And you don't have to do that, Rachel.
Right. Oh yeah, and I'm there sometimes myself too,
Yeah.
but it's so beautiful to then experience the shift that can occur in our coming moments when we do have even just that one instance of really breathing into the transition that's taking place and what we're leaving behind in that moment and what we're stepping into. And I think that then whatever interactions we're going to have directly after that will be so much more pure and present and probably lighthearted, but also meaningful, rather than carrying that sense of rushed energy or anxious energy into the interactions.
Talk to us about stress. I mean, we all have seen the studies about the amount of stress that can not help with your health, can be a detriment to your longevity, your health and wellness in the long term. How does stress play into this? How does mindfulness help combat the effects of stress? I mean, there's no way to avoid stress. We all deal with it in our lives every single day, but
Right.
how does mindfulness help when it comes to keeping stress level down?
That's a great question. I think such an important question also because it is something that I think collectively is just at such a high right now. People are very stressed, both individually and as communities and as societies at large. And so I think addressing stress at an internal individual level can also then help to kind of span out into some of those other areas where stress is present as well, which is also to me really beautiful and inspiring to think of the possibility of each single person that's practicing mindfulness potentially being able to play a role in lowering the stress of their community or their family or society even. So I think that stress is something that can be compiled over time, which we've all experienced to varying degrees, I'm sure. But it is something that unfortunately gets stored in our bodies. And our bodies, like everything, can only handle so much before things kind of go haywire. And so oftentimes stress can be correlated to a lot of physical diseases or even chronic pain and other more mental or psychological issues that can arise. For example, I think it can oftentimes look kind of like a journey where there's all these different little destinations along the way representing different components of the stress and the impacts of that stress until there is that final destination, which then will lead to a new journey. But the final destination I'm thinking of is like that breaking point moment. And so for me, to make that a little more clear, I had a lot of stress just compile for many years prior to mindfulness and meditation, and a lot of grief and other elements that were things that just were not being processed. And so I know that my body was storing them. And then eventually I started to see those physical manifestations of health issues arising and different things that just were not going right in my body, that were not functioning as they should be. And then it led to that breaking point moment eventually for me, which is what I then believe led to this new pathway that formed of seeking help through mindfulness and then a much more beautiful journey. But for me, it did take that kind of messy, painful journey that initiated from stress to then get to the breaking point and then the new pathway. So I don't think that stress also should be feared or should be feared in general. I think it should be something that can be seen as an opportunity and can be that moment that can lead us to the redirect that we need to get our lives or our journeys back in a direction that we want to go. But to answer your question, I think that mindfulness can be so powerful just for lowering our overall stress hormones in so many different ways. Just the physiological effects that it can have are very profound, and there are a lot of research studies that are done on just the power of meditation on our brain and even like the gray matter in our brain, for example. And there have been a lot of studies also shown in how meditation can impact things like chronic pain. And we can even do meditation to sometimes heal our bodies. And that's not always the case, but sometimes it actually can. I think especially if whatever it is that we're dealing with at a physical level is instigated primarily from stress. So I think mindfulness can really be a healer in sorts and can be a superpower when it comes to stress and all of the different impacts that stress can create.
It's almost this sense of mindfulness causing you to slow down. And this
Yeah.
world is so busy and it's coming at us so fast. And it almost is, we've talked about this on the podcast of kind of being where your feet are or just being in the present moment. And the reminder to stay there, to slow down, I think can also help us to just create some space for
Right.
ourselves in this world that seems to be moving so fast.
Absolutely. And I love that word space because I think meditation can also create that for us, just even in our own minds and in our interactions with our emotions. because I know that a lot of times people think that meditation is about emptying the mind. And I certainly went into that at first, thinking in that same way. And that carries that pressure that we talked about and that intimidation. But then through time and through resources and really great teachers, I've learned that mindfulness is really more about learning how to be a loving witness to what it is that we're experiencing inwardly and outwardly. And by being that loving witness, not only are we creating a little bit of space between us and whatever it is so that it's not controlling or dominating our experience, but also so that we can connect to a place of compassion and love within that will then radiate out.
What do you mean by loving witness?
So I like to think of that kind of like as an observer. Like if you were to imagine yourself in a park, for example, we'll use that illustration, and there could be a lot of different people sitting on the same bench. There could be someone that's looking at the park and just making a lot of judgments about everything that they don't like about it. Like maybe the grass is too tall, they don't like what some of the people are wearing or how the kids are behaving or the temperature, things like that. There are always so many different judgments that can be formed in an instance. And I'm sure we've all experienced that where we find ourselves
Sure.
judging and don't want to be, but it just sometimes occurs naturally. And then there could be someone sitting on the bench and just being totally oblivious to everything that's going on around them. Maybe they're just literally asleep or just in their complete own universe and have no idea what's going on around them. Maybe a kid could fall down and they wouldn't even notice it. And then the loving witness to me would be someone that's sitting on the bench and truly just seeing things exactly as they are without feeling the need to make judgments and without feeling the need to react, but instead able to find a place of acceptance and ease around what's occurring.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
And where, I know you touched on this, but where does self-compassion come into all of this? Because I think it's really easy, you have such a beautiful way of describing things, and I think it's really easy to think as a listener, at least I feel myself doing this, of like, yes, that's what I need. I'm going to do all of those things. And when you give yourself a list of things to do, it comes with pressure. So where does compassion for yourself come into all of this?
That's a great question. I think that's so true as well, that it's important to partner anything that we're going to be potentially weaving into our lives after this with compassion. So I'm glad that we're talking about it now. But I think compassion could also be thought of as a self-tenderness or nurture, but also grace. And so just accepting the fact that every single one of us, every one of our listeners, and you and I as well, and everyone that's a part of Skyterra, we are all human beings, and human beings come with a level of imperfection. And none of us are going to master perfection while we are on this side of earth, or maybe ever. But I think that when we can just accept that with a feeling of tenderness and also just a feeling of ease around not having to be perfect, then when we have those moments of inconsistency or instability or not following through, then we can come back to that place of remembering that we're human beings and that human beings are going to have ebbs and flows and good days and bad days and positive moments and ones that aren't as positive, and that we'll also have days where we really stick to everything that we set out to do and days where it might feel like we didn't accomplish one thing that we meant to, and that's all allowed because it's all just part of being a human and really embracing the human experience. But I think that compassion is practicing, like actively practicing, showing ourselves love in those moments. And when we do that, it helps to lay a foundation for that to become our operating system. I think a lot of times it's hardest to show compassion to ourselves because we know everything about us, at least to the degree that we can see. And that can be hard sometimes because we get to see all of our moments where we're not living or operating in the way that we wish that we could, or not showing up in the way that we wish that we could. And that can be compiled sometimes into a lot of guilt or frustration. But when we're actively practicing coming back to that place of compassion and acceptance inwardly, I think it just becomes the way that we live and interact with others. And we don't even have to think about being compassionate to people anymore. It just is the lens through which we see and kind of the state that our heart is in, if that makes sense.
That's the thing that you said to me last week, Claire, that really stuck with me, which is, compassion starts from within. And you're right, it can be so hard to be compassionate towards ourselves. But if you are compassionate to yourself, it's so much easy for it to flow out.
Right.
to your neighbors and your community, and that's what we all want, right? We all want to be a
Yeah,
loving witness and a
absolutely.
loving part of our communities.
Right. And I think it's felt more authentically whenever we have that solid foundation from within, too, because we can try to force ourselves to be compassionate to a certain limit. But then I think even with that, sometimes it's not felt as vulnerably and as authentically and as deeply as when we're really letting it come from that place within.
So we've talked about stress. What about mindfulness can help us not just deal with hard things that have already happened in our lives, but prepare for hardships that may be coming in the future? How do we use mindfulness to build up some fortitude going forwards?
That's a great question as well. And I think that mindfulness and the practices that mindfulness can encompass really can just help to create more authentic resilience within us, but also that place of non reactivity that we've kind of already touched on. And I can share personally in regards to this as well, because in my journey with mindfulness, towards the beginning, I was in that state of hopelessness. And when I started having those health issues arise, I felt very hopeless with that as well, and really found myself in more of a victim mindset. And then I think one day I just had kind of a wake up moment where I realized through mindfulness and through having those moments of slowing down, eventually bringing the information forward to me that I did not want to be a victim in that any longer, and wanted to take on a place of empowerment, and wanted to, first of all, just learn everything that I could about what I was experiencing, but then also choose and discern what I was willing to accept and what I was not willing to accept in terms of what other voices were telling me about the issues that I was facing. And I think that can be applied to so many things beyond just health issues. A lot of times we are kind of operating in a place of trusting in experts or trusting in the people that we care about. And that can be beautiful, but I think that it's also important to know when to challenge certain mindsets or certain things that are delivered to us that may not actually align with how we feel or how we want to feel, and then being able to then have the resources available to us to figure out or forge a new pathway that feels more authentic, and to take on new mindsets that feel more like our own, and the ones that are going to lead us to experiencing whatever challenge it is in the way that will be the most fruitful for our growth, but also the most pain free as possible. Because we know it's going to come with some pain, but some of the pain oftentimes is unnecessary if we're honest. And I think mindfulness can help to alleviate some of that unnecessary pain. So, an example would be even just a few minutes of breath work a day, helping someone to over time prepare their system to then maybe get a bad piece of information that could normally send them in a tailspin or send them into a panic attack, even. And then through those moments of breath work that they had been practicing in the months prior, even weeks prior, they find themselves instead just able to take it in and pause for a moment and then respond in a more clear state of mind and a more stable place emotionally than they otherwise would. And I've seen meditation do that for me time and time again in like small practical ways, but also in the really challenging moments of life that can sometimes break us or can feel like they break us. I don't think we ever actually break, but it can sometimes feel like we're broken.
Yeah.
And I think that mindfulness can really help us to remember that we're not, and can help to connect us back to that place of empowerment, but also discernment and intuition. And then also just all of the inner resources that will then practically help us to navigate whatever challenge it is with courage and grace and with wisdom as well.
Thanks, Claire. And then we've talked about breath work. We've talked about, pausing and having gratitude. We've talked about legs up on the wall. And then what what else? How do beginners get started? So I've realized that I want to incorporate mindfulness into my self-care routine. What would be a few pieces of advice that you might give for our listeners just to get started?
I think with any goal and with any new thing that we are wanting to weave into our lives, starting small is going to lead to the greatest success, but also the greatest fulfillment and ease with incorporating whatever it is that we're seeking to make a part of our lives. So, I would recommend for people to either from this episode or from a little mindfulness book that you could purchase, choose just one practice that kind of intrigues you or speaks to you, and start just with maybe a few minutes of that if it's possible to put it into a few minutes. For example, if someone is really into nature, maybe starting with just a 5-minute mindfulness in nature walk where they're not plugged into their phones and are not, doing anything other than just experiencing that walk in nature and taking all of it in and really being present and grounded. Or if someone's more into music, then they could even choose a song that speaks to them and play one song, trying to give all of their presence to the song and really taking in all of the words, and then maybe pausing for 30 seconds after to just check in with themselves and really observe how they're feeling and practice being that loving witness to what's occurring in them after hearing that music that speaks to them. I think there are so many different examples because mindfulness can encompass so much. But I would say just anything that someone thinks could potentially bring them to that place of being more centered within themselves, more connected to the world around them, and more in touch with all of the gifts that they hold, like their intuition and those things that we've mentioned, then that could be their first mindfulness practice that they just really intentionally incorporate until it feels natural, and then move on and expand and maybe let it evolve over time, but in a way that feels seamless and manageable and sustainable.
Do you have a book recommendation?
Oh, I have a lot of books that I like around mindfulness. I would say one just teacher that I really like that has a lot of books is Thich Nhat Hanh. And he has a lot of just beautiful quotes as well. So if someone wanted to even just start with getting a few quotes, I feel like he just really encompasses mindfulness because everything that he teaches is actually very simple and very down to earth. But when you do put it into practice, so powerful. Like one of his quotes that I think is also a title of his book is "Peace is every step." But so simple, but it's also really profound if you just think of every step that you take can hold peace for you when you're rooted in that step and you're present in that moment. So I really love anything by Thich Nhat Hanh, but I think there are a lot of amazing resources out there now around mindfulness. So I would say same thing for that, for people to just choose what speaks for them and resonates for them, because I think that different languages and different styles of writing can really alter the experience of the information as well. And so choosing like an author that feels trustworthy to that person and just a language and tone and all of that that also resonates for them will help to really bring it more down to earth, but also integrate it into their beings and their experiences.
Claire, so thank you so much for your wisdom today.
Thank you, Rachel.
Is there anything else about mindfulness or self-care that you want to make sure we talk about?
I think that we touched on a lot of the things that I feel really passionate about in regards to mindfulness and meditation. So I think maybe instead we could just leave them with the reminder to approach this with compassion and to let it also be fun, because mindfulness can feel kind of serious and heavy sometimes, but it can also be so fun and exciting and can connect us to those moments of awe and wonder and joy and lightheartedness and laughter and so many medicinal things that are available to us. So I think that I would just like to leave people with a reminder to stay compassionate, have fun, and to do what feels authentic to them in regards to their mindfulness journey.
Thank you so much, Claire. And one thing that I did want to add, listeners, of course, we would love if you came to Skyterra and experienced some of Claire's classes or her lectures. If you're not able to do that, if you go to skyterraathome.com and go to our premium coaching section, you're actually able to work with Claire virtually, one-on-one, if that's something that you're looking for. So check that out. That's the premium coaching section of skyterraathome.com. And thank you again, Claire, so much for your wisdom today.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's always a pleasure to get to connect with you and learn from you as well.
Bye, everybody. The Inspired Intentions podcast is a production of Skyterra Wellness Retreat. Special thanks to our executive producer, Alan Broyhill. Send us your questions and comments to inspiredintentions@skyterrawellness.com. Subscribe on iTunes and everywhere podcasts can be found. If someone you know might benefit from this podcast, share Inspired Intentions with them and give us a 5-star rating. Join us next week as we cut through the unrealistic noise on diets and fitness and show you how healthy living fits seamlessly into your already busy life. Thanks for listening.